So the Grammys, they're supposed to be all about the music, right? But it feels like lately they've become something else, a stage for big political statements. And that's got a lot of people talking. We're going to break down a viral critique that's been making the rounds, one that asks a really sharp question. When a celebrity gets up on that stage to talk about change, are they being a real activist, or are they just playing a part? All right, so the critique we're looking at today kicks things off with a pretty memorable line. It compares the whole scene to something straight out of the Hunger Games, the Capitol. And right away that paints a picture, doesn't it? It gets you thinking, is there something a little off when you have multimillionaires dressed in these incredible, expensive outfits lecturing the rest of us about injustice? And that really gets to the core of this whole argument. The idea is that the Grammys aren't so much about celebrating music anymore. Instead, they've turned into this platform for celebrities to strike a pose, And the political messages they're sending from that stage, well, this critique says they just feel empty. So how does this critique build its case? Well, it's really built on 4 main points. It argues that the celebrity activism we see is 1, kind of vague, 2, often hypocritical, 3, that the outrage seems pretty selective, and 4, that the messaging just ends up confusing everyone. We're going to dive into each of these and look at the specific examples the source uses to back it all up.
Okay, let's start with that first one, contradiction. This is the whole do as I say, not as I do idea. That what these stars preach on stage just doesn't line up with their real lives. And to make this point, the critique zeroes in on a really big name.
The source brings up this quote from Billie Eilish, and it kind of poses a riddle here. Think about it. If you're saying that no person can be illegal on a piece of land, how can you also say that land was stolen? The critique argues that, logically, those two ideas just don't work together. They basically cancel each other out. And this is where the argument about hypocrisy really gets laid out. So, on one hand, you've got these anti-capitalist statements, but on the other hand, the source points to this huge business empire. We're not just talking about music, we're talking perfumes, branded Uno cards of all things, and yeah, millions of dollars in real estate. So the question becomes, can you really have it both ways? Can those two things exist side by side without being a major contradiction? All right, so from things people said, the critique shifts gears to look at symbols, the things they wear. It zooms in on a specific red carpet moment to make the point that sometimes what looks like a political statement is really just a fashion choice with nothing behind it. And the example they use is producer Jack Antonoff. So he shows up on the red carpet and he's wearing this pin with a pretty direct political slogan on it. An interviewer spots it and, naturally, asks him about it. And his answer, well, it became Exhibit A for this whole critique. So what did he say? He literally said, just go ahead and imagine the reasons, and those are my reasons. I mean, wow. For the people making this critique, that was it. That was the perfect example of an empty gesture. It's like making a statement, but then telling everyone else, hey, you figure out what it means. It puts all the work back on the audience. So we've covered vague statements. Now the critique moves on to what it calls confusing statements. The argument here is that the speeches you hear at the Grammys can really blur the lines on some super complex issues, especially a hot-button topic like immigration. Now, the whole argument here really comes down to one key distinction. The source says that celebrities tend to mix up 2 completely different conversations. On one side, you have celebrating the amazing contributions of legal immigrants. On the other, you have the really heated political debate over illegal immigration. And the critique says they're being treated as the same thing. And to back this up, the source gives us a couple of examples. First, there's Shabuzi, who said, immigrants built this country. The critique argues that a broad statement like that just lumps everyone together, ignoring the difference between legal and illegal status. Then they mention Olivia Dean, who's from the UK, talking about a US issue. The point they're making is that her experience as the granddaughter of someone who is probably a legal immigrant is being used to weigh in on a totally separate conversation. Okay, that brings us to the last big piece of this critique. Selective outrage. This is all about who gets a pass and who doesn't. The source asks, why are some people put on a pedestal at the Grammys, while some pretty serious stuff about other people gets completely ignored? So first, they point to the standing ovation that news anchor Don Lemon received. Now, he was there with U2 to introduce a tribute to the victims of the Nova Music Festival attack. But the source found this whole moment odd. They question why the Grammys chose to spotlight a journalist who's had his own share of public controversies. And then there's the case of artist Pusha T. This is pretty wild. On the exact same day he won a Grammy,
His name showed up in those unsealed court documents connected to the Jeffrey Epstein case. The source holds this up as a really jarring example of selective attention. You have the industry celebrating his win on one hand, and on the other, just silence about these very serious allegations that were coming out at literally the same moment.
So, after walking us through all these different examples, what's the bottom line? What's the final point of this critique? Well, it's not really a gentle suggestion. It's more like a really strong warning. Let's just pull it all together. The core argument here is that the activism you see at the Grammys is just broken. The source paints this picture of hypocrisy, meaningless statements, muddled messages, and looking the other way when it's convenient. And it all adds up to what they see as just a performance of caring, not actual, real-deal activism.
And that leads us to the source's final and very direct message. It basically says, look, because of all this, you can't trust these people. They're trying to tell you how to vote and what to think. It's a flat-out warning. Don't look to Hollywood for your political compass.
And when you step back, this whole critique leaves us with a much bigger question, one that goes way beyond just the Grammys. We live in a world where a celebrity influence is everywhere, right? So how are we, the audience, supposed to know the difference between someone who's genuinely fighting for a cause and someone who's just putting on a show? And maybe even more important, does it matter? Does a celebrity's lifestyle change how we should feel about their message? It is a really, really tricky line to draw.